Let me start by saying this. I never wanted trouble. I spent 15 years behind a desk crunching numbers. CPA license framed. Retirement calculator bookmarked. My biggest risk used to be claiming mileage too aggressively on a client's taxes. Then my uncle died. And everything unraveled. His name was Charles Weller. Most people in my family called him a drifter, a recluse. I called him a ghost. I hadn't seen him in 20 years, not since he showed up to my high school graduation with a flask and a leather briefcase, gave me a folded-up dollar bill and said, "Spend this when it matters." He left town the next day. Now he was dead. Massive heart attack, alone in a motel room just outside Reno. I wouldn't even have known if the lawyer hadn't called. "You're listed in his will," she said. "He left you something. You'll need to sign for it in person." I flew out the next week. Left behind my condo, my spreadsheets, and my cat Winston, who was now the responsibility of a neighbor who didn't like either of us. Reno was colder than I expected. So was the motel. Room 214. One bed, cracked ceiling, and the faint smell of cigar smoke and vinegar. The lawyer handed me a worn leather satchel. "That's it?" I asked. "That's all he had left," she said. "That, and a safe deposit box. But the box requires a key only he had." Of course it did. Back in my rental car, I opened the satchel. Inside was a book. Thick. Dusty. Wrapped in butcher paper. I peeled it away and saw what it was. A ledger. A bank ledger. Green cloth cover. Dated 2006 to 2009. Each page filled with handwritten transactions, not printed, not typed. And not in dollars. In gold. At first, I thought it was a joke. Uncle Charles always was odd. Maybe this was some paranoid fantasy, a playbook from a life he never lived. But the entries were too precise. Transfer amounts. Routing codes. Vault IDs. All marked with initials. Some crossed out. Some circled. And then I saw it, a yellow sticky note, pressed inside the back cover. Find F. Langley. Trust no one else. No number. No address. Just a name. I'm not a detective. I'm an accountant. A guy who color codes folders and gets excited over clean audit reports. But this felt different. Like something I wasn't supposed to see. Like something someone might kill to keep hidden. Back home, I locked the ledger in a fireproof box behind my filing cabinet. I tried to forget it. I couldn't. The next morning, I ran a background check on F. Langley. One hit. Franklin Langley. Former senior analyst at Bayview First Trust, the same bank my uncle once worked for. The same bank that collapsed in 2009 during the financial crash. Langley disappeared a year later. Official story. Retired to Belize. Unofficially. No one's seen him since. I didn't sleep the night I found Langley's name. I stayed up, staring at the ceiling, replaying every page of the ledger in my head. It wasn't just a record of transactions. It was something else, something coded. A breadcrumb trail. And my uncle had died protecting it. The next morning, I requested access to old Bayview First Trust archives, what little remained after the crash. As a CPA, I had just enough professional excuse to make a formal request. They denied me, of course. So I got creative. I called a friend from grad school, Denise Vargas, now working in internal audits for the FDIC. I didn't say much, just that I was looking into an old fraud case for educational purposes. She sent me scanned documents within a day. Among them were names I recognized from the ledger: J. Carrington, H. Patel, F. Langley. They weren't just employees. They were key personnel in a branch listed under Asset Recovery and Vault Logistics. What does that even mean? I returned to the ledger. Line by line, page by page. The pattern wasn't linear. Some entries repeated but slightly altered. Amounts shifted in decimal places. Location codes rotated. It wasn't random. It was a cipher. And my uncle had built it. In the margins, small letters were penciled in, too faint to notice at first. But when I wrote them down in order, they started to form words. Coordinates. A spot just outside Yerington, Nevada. Near an abandoned Bayview First storage facility. The next day, I drove out there. The road to Yerington was empty. One of those desert highways where the sun flattens the landscape into a mirage. I had a location from the cipher, 39.0025 degree N, 119. 1463 degrees west. That put me just east of the old Bayview storage depot. I parked behind a hill and hiked the rest of the way. The facility looked like it hadn't been touched in over a decade. Rusted fence. Broken windows. Faded company logo on a cinderblock wall. But the door wasn't locked. Inside was silence. The kind of silence that swallows footsteps. Old office chairs. File cabinets coated in dust. A toppled sign reading, "Restricted personnel only." I followed the coordinates deeper into the building. The room at the end of the corridor had no markings, just an old keypad. I almost turned back, until I noticed the keypad had been rewired recently. I opened my bag and pulled out the ledger. On the inside of the back cover, barely visible, was a sequence of numbers I'd ignored before. 9 digits. I typed them in. Click. The door opened. Inside, a metal container, no bigger than a shoebox. Combination lock. And on top of it, a Polaroid photo. My uncle. Standing with 2 men, one of them was definitely Langley. The third man's face was scratched out. On the back of the photo. "If you found this, you're not safe." I grabbed the box and the photo, shoved them into my bag, and left. I wasn't followed. Or so I thought. That night, back at my motel, I parked in a different spot. Took side streets. Watched my rear view. At 3:12 a.m., I heard it. A soft tap on the door. Then a voice. "Mr. Weller. We need to talk." I didn't answer. Whoever was outside my motel room at 3 a.m. didn't knock again. They just stood there. Waiting. I grabbed the ledger and the metal box, shoved them into my duffel, and crept to the bathroom window. Opened it slowly. Slipped out onto the gravel. I didn't look back. I drove until sunrise. 2 hours south, I pulled into a diner parking lot, ordered eggs I didn't eat, and checked my phone. 2 missed calls from an unknown number. No voicemail. I wasn't paranoid. I was careful. At least that's what I told myself. I opened the box. Inside, a microcassette, a brass key, and a folded envelope. The tape was labeled Langley/Final. I didn't have a recorder, but the envelope held cash, 520s, and a bus ticket to San Francisco. The note inside was written in my uncle's handwriting. Go to 2122, Mission Street. Ask for Lenore. Show her the key. No explanation. No signature. Just that. I took the bus. 6 hours of bumping down the coast, watching dry hills roll past the window. No one followed. At least, no one obvious. San Francisco greeted me with fog. Mission Street smelled like diesel and wet concrete. 2122 was a pawn shop. The pawn shop didn't look like much. Dusty windows. Neon signs that hadn't worked in years. Inside, the shelves were cluttered with everything from broken radios to cracked skateboards. An old woman stood behind the counter, smoking a cigarette through a long ivory holder. "You're looking for Lenore?" she asked before I could speak. I nodded. She tapped the counter with one long fingernail. "Key?" I slid it to her. She examined it, then handed it back. "Follow me." She led me through a beaded curtain into a back room filled with filing cabinets and one small table. She pulled out an old tape recorder, the kind I hadn't seen since the 90s. "Put it in," she said. I inserted the microcassette. The tape crackled to life. Langley's voice. "If you're hearing this, I'm likely dead. Or close to it. My name is Franklin Langley. I was a compliance officer at Bayview First Trust. But that was just the surface. The truth? We were moving money, not just for clients, but for entire governments. Shell Corps. Shadow entities. Charles Weller, your uncle, was one of the few people who figured it out. He built a parallel ledger, a fail-safe in case things went sideways. That ledger you're holding? It's not just accounting. It's proof. And a map. Some of the funds were converted to gold. Hidden. Buried. Off-grid. And now, after all these years, someone wants it silenced. You need to decide, turn it over to the feds, or disappear and bury it again. The tape clicked off. Lenore said nothing. Outside, the fog had cleared. The street felt colder. Sharper. I walked for hours. My mind spiraled. All this time, I thought I was following a puzzle. I didn't realize I was walking into a war. I spent the next 2 nights holed up in a cheap motel in Oakland, staring at the ceiling, the microcassette, and the brass key. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Langley's voice again. It's proof. And a map. But a map to what? I'd only scratched the surface. The ledger wasn't just coated with transactions. It was layered, like a spider's web. Charles hadn't just documented the past. He had embedded the route forward. I pulled the ledger from the fireproof duffel and laid it flat on the table. This time, I didn't just read it. I studied it like a field manual. Certain entries had odd pen pressure. Others were grouped with symbols in the margins, triangles, crosses, asterisks. And then it clicked. They weren't just notes. They were directions. Coordinates embedded into the routing numbers, disguised as transfers. I used Langley's codes and decrypted 3 new locations. All in remote areas. One in the Sierra foothills, one near a freight yard in Utah, and one deep in Arizona desert. Each location had matching ledger entries. Each one showed an increase in gold volume, followed by zeroed-out transactions a month later. Someone had emptied them. But not all of them. I booked a rental and drove east. The Utah freight yard was now an industrial storage site, fencing and barbed wire, no signage. I waited until 3 a.m., and climbed in through a torn section in the back. I found the locker listed in the ledger, hashtag 1197B, inside, crates. Most were empty. But one had something that made my stomach twist. A hard drive. Labeled, Archive, GLDX/confidential/access, Langley Weller only. I didn't open it. Not there. I got out, dumped the rental, and rode a Greyhound all the way back to Sacramento. Back at the motel, I plugged the drive into a burner laptop. Encrypted. But there was a text file. Unlocked. If you're reading this, you now hold evidence of misappropriated government funds, laundered assets, and the movement of gold reserves off the books. You will be followed. You will be approached. You will be offered money, power, or worse. At the bottom, in Charles's handwriting. There's still one vault left. And they don't know about it. Charles wasn't just leaving me clues, he was giving me a mission. The final line in his note haunted me. There's still one vault left. And they don't know about it. I had a ledger, a hard drive full of classified data, and now, a destination. I just didn't know where yet. But Charles did. And the answer, I realized, had been hiding in the ledger's first page all along. That page looked like a dedication. Handwritten, just a simple quote. Some truths are buried because they shine too bright in daylight. At the bottom, the initials M.S. I thought it was a reference. Maybe a name. Then I remembered something from my childhood. My uncle had a map hanging in his garage. It was stained with oil and thumbtacked into warped plywood. In the bottom right corner, the words, Map Sheet M.S.-41. A geological survey. That quote wasn't just poetic, it was literal. 2 days later, I found it. The map was digitized in an old online geological archive. M.S.-41 covered a narrow stretch of land between the Nevada border and the Mojave Desert. One marked site caught my attention, Playa 14C. An abandoned military storage test range. I didn't hesitate. I rented a truck, bought 2 weeks' worth of gear, and drove into the desert. It was silent out there. Too silent. I pitched camp near a dried-up lakebed and began scanning the area using an old metal detector from a pawn shop in Reno. Nothing for the first day. Nothing for the second. On the third day, I found it. A small panel buried beneath packed clay. Faded yellow paint. Letters almost invisible. Property of Bayview First Trust. Vault 80. It took an hour to unearth. Beneath it, a steel hatch with a lock that fit exactly one thing. The brass key from the satchel. It clicked open. Inside was a tunnel. I climbed down, flashlight flickering against the concrete walls. 20 feet in, the tunnel opened into a chamber, square, reinforced, and sealed like a bank vault. Dust swirled in the stale air. There was no gold. No glitter. Nothing cinematic. Just a small, sealed container with a digital keypad, blinking red. And a handwritten note taped to the lid. If you're here, you've already made your choice. Don't stop now. I stared at the blinking keypad. 3 tries. That's all I had. The ledger didn't give me a passcode, at least, not obviously. But when I examined the digits engraved around the keyhole, I noticed something strange. 6 small numbers, etched in a ring around the lock. Not factory-made. Hand-etched. They matched a date in the ledger, April 12, 2009. A transaction listed as, Final Transfer, F.L.C.W. Franklin Langley to Charles Weller. That had to be it. I punched in 041209. The light flashed green. The lock clicked open. Inside, 1 sealed envelope, 2 gold bars, and a burner phone. And beneath that, a folder. Stamped, Do Not Duplicate, Federal Oversight. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared. Then the burner phone rang. No caller ID. My hand hovered over it. I shouldn't have answered. But I did. A calm voice. Male. Confident. Mr. Weller. You've made quite a journey. I didn't speak. You've seen enough to know what you're holding isn't just evidence. It's leverage. We'd like to make you an offer. I laughed. I couldn't help it. I'm not for sale. He didn't flinch. You misunderstand. This isn't a threat. It's an invitation. We're not your enemy. We want the same thing Charles wanted, order. Come to Denver. Tomorrow. Room 1117. Hyatt Regency. No tricks. The line went dead. I sat in the dark of that underground vault for hours. They knew everything. My name. My location. My uncle's work. But they were still playing nice. Which meant they needed me. Which meant I had power. I didn't sleep. At sunrise, I buried the container again, sealed the hatch, and covered the ground as best I could. Then I drove to the nearest airport. One way to Denver. If they wanted to talk, they'd talk. But I wouldn't come empty-handed. The Hyatt Regency in Denver looks like any other hotel from the outside. Steel and glass. People in suits dragging roller bags. No one watching, and everyone watching. I checked in under a fake name. Room 1117 was at the end of a long hallway, right beside the stairwell. Strategic. Easy exit. Classic intelligence move. I knocked once. The door opened immediately. There were 3 of them. One in a gray suit. One in a bomber jacket. One in jeans and a turtleneck, pretending to be relaxed. Only one spoke. "We'll keep this short," he said. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, my name. My face. My financial records. Photos of me standing outside the Utah freight yard. "You're not just involved," he said. "You're central." I asked him who he was. He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "Charles Weller was one of ours. Until he wasn't." That hit like a punch. He continued. "Charles went dark when he realized Langley was planning to go public. He warned us. Gave us a chance to bury it. But Langley didn't listen. We need that drive back." I shook my head. "Then we make it worth your while. You walk away with new ID, new life. 0 taxes. Access. Autonomy. Or." He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. I asked him a simple question. "What happens if I disappear?" He smiled. "Then we disappear you harder." I stood up. "You already have everything you need. You just don't have the vault." I turned to the door. He didn't stop me. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk for 15 minutes. Heart pounding. Options running out. I could hand over the drive and vanish. Or finish what Charles started. Expose everything. And let the whole rotten system burn. I didn't sleep the night after the meeting. I walked the Denver streets until the sky turned from steel to pink. Somewhere between Union Station and the old courthouse, I realized, they were never going to let me go. Not alive. And if I gave up the vault's location, everything Charles risked would vanish into another black file. No. The ledger didn't just hold secrets. It held power. And I was done running. I rented a workspace under a fake name, just a desk and Wi-Fi. Then I cracked the hard drive open with a data recovery program. Langley had been meticulous. Spreadsheets. PDFs, photos of gold ingots with federal stamps. Transaction records that traced illicit transfers across dummy corporations and shell banks. Dates. Names. Locations. Some of the documents were over 20 years old. Others? Just months. They were still moving the money. I called Denise, my old FDIC friend. I didn't tell her everything. Just enough to make her nervous. Jesus, Jack. If this is real. It is. I can't protect you. You know that, right? I don't need protection. What do you need? I paused. Just make sure someone listens when the bomb goes off. Then I hung up. That night, I uploaded everything. The full archive. The photos. The decrypted ledger. I dumped it all into a secure, anonymous server, programmed it to go live in 48 hours. Unless I stopped it. Unless I was silenced. They came the next day. Black SUV. No plates. Same man from the hotel, bomber jacket this time. He didn't try to threaten me. He made one last offer. Double the original deal. Erase your past. We'll even pin Langley's death on someone else. I looked him in the eye. I already hit send. He didn't blink. You're making a mistake. No, I said. I'm finishing a ledger. The next 48 hours were a blur. I left Denver. Burned the ledger. Buried the key. Changed my face, my name. Went off-grid. And then. The site went live. The story broke. Congress opened hearings. News anchors scrambled. Markets shook. And somewhere, I imagined Charles finally exhaling. They never found me. But I know they're still looking. Doesn't matter. Because now the world knows. And the map is out there. Waiting for someone else to follow it. Just like I did. The end.